Welcome to Policy Matters. Our goal is to keep you informed on government and policy, how it's important and why it matters to you. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson. Jumping right in, President Biden has asked Congress for more than $98 billion in emergency funding to help cover the cost of recent natural disasters, including Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. The majority of the money would go towards the Federal Emergency Management Agency and Agricultural Department, but there are requests for 16 agencies, including Housing and Urban Development and the Transportation Department, to help repair housing and rebuild infrastructure. Congress last passed disaster funding 2 years ago. Since then, the two hurricanes tore through the Southeast, causing millions of dollars of damage. Shalonda Young, the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, told reporters that the Biden administration continues to support and provide federal support after the devastating fires in Maui, tornadoes across the Midwest, and the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. There were also severe storms in Alaska, Connecticut, Louisiana, New Mexico, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, Young said. It's absolutely critical that these communities know that their government has not forgotten them. The largest chunk of funding, about $40 billion, would be for FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund, so it has to be enough money to last through the coming year. The White House is also requesting $24 billion for the USDA to help farmers hit by disasters and for school lunch programs and food banks in affected regions. Russia has launched missiles towards the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro early Thursday morning, including a new type of ballistic missile that has North Atlantic Treaty Organization members on edge. The powerful next-level battlefield weapon, which has been analyzed by the Pentagon, has prompted NATO to hold an emergency summit. Among the cruise missiles intercepted in the assault was the Department of Defense has identified a variant known as RS-26, an experimental immediate-range ballistic missile. The missile, aimed in central Ukraine, focused on one area, carrying 6 warheads about 750 miles from the launch location, in retaliation for Ukraine's attack in the earlier week on the military facility in Russia. Ukraine is bracing for more attacks. While publicly, U.S. officials say Russia likely possesses only a handful of these experimental missiles, sources say these ballistic missiles pose a unique threat. They're capable of reaching 3,000 miles and carrying a multiple payload system. These systems are designed to carry and launch multiple warheads and to release them at different speeds and different directions, potentially over an area of more than 1,000 miles. They're also capable of carrying nuclear warheads, heightening U.S. and NATO concerns further. It's first time since the United States has been used such a system, and much still remains unknown about their utilization. Indiana's Lieutenant Governor-elect Micah Beckwith recently stirred controversy by criticizing the Indiana Daily Student, a student-run newspaper at Indiana University, after it published an editorial focusing on inclusivity, and representation of marginalized groups. In the opinion piece, the writers called for greater diversity in campus programs and leadership. Beckwith, a conservative Republican, took issue with what he described as the paper's left-wing agenda, accusing it of pushing a divisive, politically correct narrative. He argued that such viewpoints were harmful to free speech and to the university's mission of fostering open debate. The criticism sparked a broader discussion about the role of the school media in shaping campus discourse. Supporters of the Indiana Daily Student defended its editorial stance, arguing that college newspapers should provide a platform for diverse opinions and reflect the changing values of the student body. Meanwhile, some aligned with Beckwith expressed concern that the paper's focus was on exclusivity, in part a broader shift leftward on college campuses. This exchange underscores the increasing tensions over political polarization in higher education, the importance of journalistic independence, and the challenge of balancing free speech with advocacy for social change. Stay tuned for your weekly history lesson after this break.
Good morning, Greyhounds, and welcome back to your Wednesday show. have some very exciting things to talk about with our very special guest.
So what do you find unique about UND, and what kind of pulled you here?
What are you doing?
Watching Good Morning Greyhounds every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m.
Today for History and Policy, we'll be discussing the Indiana General Assembly, what it does, how it works, and what you can expect in the upcoming 2025 state budgeting session, which will begin here in January. The Indiana General Assembly is a legislative body that makes laws for the state. It's made up of two chambers, the Indiana House of Representatives with 100 members that serve 2-year terms, and the Indiana Senate with 50 members that serve 4-year terms. These lawmakers represent you, the people of Indiana, and meet each year to craft state laws, pass budgets, and tackle key issues affecting the state. Every 2 years, the General Assembly begins its regular session in early January. This session lasts for about 4 months, running through mid-April. It's here that legislators work on bills ranging from education to healthcare, infrastructure, public safety, and other areas and issues important in Indiana. Sessions often begin with a State of the State address from the governor, setting the tone for the year's legislative priorities. This year, we'll have a new governor, which means new priorities and focus for the state. Indiana voters selected Mike Braun to serve as their new leader of the state executive branch. Braun will succeed incumbent Governor Eric Holcomb, whose term limited out of office. Lawmakers then debate, amend, and vote on bills that can become law. After the regular session ends in April, the legislature can convene for a special session as needed to address urgent matters, such as budget adjustments or unforeseen crises. This happened in 2022 after the state had a budget surplus, and during the special session, the state legislature ultimately passed the law prohibiting abortion in the state of Indiana just 2 months after the Dobbs versus Jackson decision overturned Roe versus Wade. During each session, much of the work happens behind the scenes in committee meetings. These are where lawmakers examine bills in depth, hear testimony from experts, and make decisions on whether bills should proceed to the full House or Senate for debate and vote. The work in committees is essential to shaping the state's laws. This is also where lawmakers hear directly from their constituents, as well as experts and advocates on key issues, before deciding whether a bill should move forward. The most bills will die in committee, meaning they fail to attain the necessary votes of approval to move forward to the Assembly floor. Some bills do succeed in getting enough votes. After a bill passes both chambers, it goes to the governor for veto or approval. The governor can sign it into law, amend it, or reject it entirely. Now, as we look ahead to the 2025 budget, there are several key areas we can expect significant attention. Each year, this legislature is tasked with crafting a balanced budget for the state, which involves setting priorities for state spending, including funding for education, healthcare, roads, public safety, and state employee wages. Lawmakers will need to balance the demands for increased investments in public education and infrastructure, all while addressing ongoing needs like mental health services and workforce development. The recent $1 billion shortfall in healthcare crisis and cost will make balancing the budget even more challenging this year. A top priority in the 2025 budget is likely to be funding for infrastructure projects. Indiana has a growing need to improve roads, bridges, and public transportation systems, particularly in rural and underserved areas. Lawmakers are expected to allocate more money towards these projects, which are seen as critical both for economic growth as well as public safety. Education funding will also be in focus. Schools across the state have voiced concerns about teacher shortages and rising operational costs. Expect lawmakers to debate proposals for increasing teacher pay, improving school facilities, and expanding resources for early education programs. Additionally, healthcare remains a critical issue. The legislature may propose more funding for Medicaid programs and mental health services, addressing the increasing demand for care, especially in rural areas. Governor Mike Braun indicated that this was an important issue to him during his campaign, and we should expect to see it as something he approaches very seriously and priority for this session as well. As for tax cuts, while the state surpluses have fueled discussion about potential tax relief, legislators will have to carefully weigh the long-term impacts on state revenue. Property taxes have increased significantly in the last several years, so taxpayers have been pushing for cuts, and Governor-elect Braun has indicated he's interested in pursuing them. However, concerns remain about whether tax cuts could undermine funding for essential services. So this will be a key issue to watch in the coming months. As the 2025 budget takes shape, there'll be a lively discussion and many negotiations as lawmakers work to balance the needs of the state with fiscal responsibility. The Indiana General Assembly will convene for its regular session in January, and over the course of several months, we'll get a clear picture of what the state's priorities will be in the upcoming budget. The decisions made in the Indiana General Assembly will have a lasting impact on the state's future, so it's important to stay informed and involved. And Levi, as we think through the General Assembly and the upcoming budget session, I know this is going to be a long session, obviously really important. What are some of the things that you're interested in watching, some of the bills you might be focused on?
As a student, I would say I'm very intrigued on what the state decides to go with education, both higher education, even though we're a private institution, there could still be some laws that affect us. But lower education, down the road, I went to Parameridian, I'll be interested to see. I know teachers' pay was mentioned.
Yeah.
I know that when it comes to standardizing what gets taught, I know that's a huge topic. I know Mike Braun on that a little bit too, on what should be taught in the classrooms. I'll be looking at that. But overall, yeah, I think with education, I think now it's actually less than 50% of the budget, correct?
It is, yes.
But it used to be historically over 50% of the budget. So education is probably lawmakers' biggest task when they come into the office. So yeah, I think education is what I'll be highlighting. Besides education, what do you think is the second spotlight?
Well, I think it's going to be healthcare because, as you mentioned, until this last budgeting session, most of the money of our state went to education, even if by a small margin, right? Yes. And so I think healthcare will take a lot of the wind out of that sails, like questions in terms of those increasing costs. I'm really interested to see how important social issues are this cycle, because when we think of social issues, they play a prominent role in non-budgeting years because you can't work on the budget, so there's nothing in terms of money. So oftentimes
it's easy to, right?
There's that emphasis. And we saw a lot of social issues, whether it was the book banning conversations or conversations in terms of tenure and freedom of speech on college campuses. So many of these conversations and social issues last legislative session. And they don't stop being relevant. It's not like they don't matter anymore, or people suddenly don't care about them in a budgeting year. That's not how humans work. That's just the way our state legislature does. So I'm curious to see if there are ways that social issues influence some of our economic decisions, or probably more likely vice versa, how the budget is going to impact some of people's positions, especially on the culture war issues that get a lot of attention and buzz.
I especially when it comes with that story that you actually previewed about what happened with IU and Michael Beckwith, talking about how, or criticizing. First of all, what an interesting story, right? I feel like intuitively it's you should know, Beckwith, that IU's probably their student body is going to be a little bit hesitant to.
They are, but I also love as a student, doesn't that make you like, oh
yes,
wow,
you got
the
noticed,
governor-elect, the lieutenant governor-elect is paying attention.
It's like really speaking truth to power, no matter what side of the aisle you on. Getting recognized by that is like, oh my gosh, I feel like for those students who would reaffirm that what we're doing here, matters and could impact it. But yeah, exactly. Like how could how might that affect what lawmakers think about increasing funding to. Another example, even though we just talked about this with football and stuff, maybe I know that the new coach for IU got a huge pay increase. It was multi-million-dollar deal. And how does he get paid? Right? So he's a coach. He's a isn't it kind of crazy? I was talking to my dad about that. It's there's so many things that we take for granted that politics intersects.
Oh, absolutely.
Even with we're watching a football game and these students go to a public university and it's that gets in their facilities and that could impact their performance, and it's oh my gosh.
Yes, and what I hope for the students that watch this show, and for community members, for people that pay attention, to me that's actually the beauty of state government is how impactful it is, how relevant it is, and then probably the other side is just that people oftentimes don't pay as much attention and they don't necessarily know. I'm really interested because we will have a new governor, new governor-elect, right? We still have a supermajority of Republicans in the House and Senate. So you have unified government, but there always is going to be a change in priorities. And with Braun in particular, I think developing, working on healthcare programs. He talked about education, but also in terms of business. Holcomb's view was very much outside the state, developing business and bringing it in. And I remember in Braun's acceptance speech, one of the lines that really stood out to me is he talked about the four corners of Indiana. And it sounded like he's going to work on cultivating and nurturing
Yeah.
businesses inside the state
Yes,
boundaries.
and retaining too businesses so to make sure
Yes.
they don't leave. Yeah.
Which I think is also really relevant to students
Yeah.
because a lot of times we talk about this brain drain,
Yeah.
and that can sometimes be very concerning,
Yeah.
I think, especially for a student population. So as we're here, and we'll hope you stay with us, Levi and I are going to be diving into our top political highlights. We've got 3 great things from this year and also looking ahead to 2025, 3 great things that we're looking forward to next year. Stay tuned.
In the heart of Indianapolis, our main mission is to keep you informed, bringing you local and national news. With the upcoming presidential election, there's no better time than now to tune in. But the most important part is you. This is UND TV News.
And welcome back. We're going to give you our top 3, focusing first on 2024, the things that we thought were most impactful that you need to remember about politics this year, and then we'll move on in terms of what we're looking forward to in 2025. But let's not jump the gun. It's still November 2024. Levi, I was going to start off with mine, and it is election focused, I have to say. But one of my first big takeaways is that the economy mattered a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness. One thing that characterized this race was the economy, right? No, and I think this broadly speaks globally that incumbents, no matter what their party, no matter their ideology, that they were punished, incumbents were punished, and they lost power globally. So I think that people, they saw high prices, they went to the grocery store, they saw, the price of eggs at some point. I remember earlier this year, maybe it was last year, but there was a point where eggs were like $8 for a dozen. And I was like, what? Like, that's crazy.
I don't know where you're shopping. The Aldi on Southport Road had them for $4, but it was still very expensive for a family of 5.
Maybe they must have been like homemade, like, like
they were
homegrown.
high quality. Were they Cadbury eggs? Because those are more expensive.
They had free range, the miles of free range or something.
But it's hard for working families to afford that. And I think that was the thing. What I find interesting about the economy is there's so many different metrics to measure it. And by most values, the economy was actually very good. But you're right, incumbents were punished this election cycle because at least in terms of inflation and costs and what your average person sees, and I think that's always important in politics. Like there's reality, but there's perception. And people are going to act and make decisions based on their perception, not based on reality.
And all these indicators that we have, like our GDP and the rate of inflation, yes, the rate of inflation was going down. And yes, the GDP was, bouncing back, and we saw, higher growth than what was expected. But if that doesn't translate to people's actual lives increasing and them seeing it on a day-to-day basis, it's not going to translate into electoral wins. It's just not going to happen.
It just doesn't really matter. I think the second thing that I thought was really important in this election cycle, and again, focusing on election here, but the candidates didn't seem to matter as much. And I'm going to explain this one. Because this one requires.
My intuition is like, I kind of disagree with that, but like, maybe, I'm eager to see.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to say. I thought the candidates mattered less, and this is why. Republicans kept saying they didn't want Donald Trump. And obviously not all Republicans. There were Donald Trump supporters that wanted him from the get-go. But there were several people within the Republican Party that said, never Trump, anyone but Trump. They had other options. And you know who won the primaries? It was Donald Trump. And then you had Kamala Harris, who took over after Joe Biden's dismal performance in June. And people thought the Democrat Party felt engaged in a way I haven't seen them in years, overjoyed, right? But with both the candidates at the top of the ticket, I don't think it made the difference where you had voters saying, we don't like the top of our ticket, or voters saying, oh, we're so excited there's a change in the top of ticket. The people that didn't like the top of their ticket ultimately had their candidate elected, while those that were excited for the replacement late in the cycle ultimately lost the election. So from my perspective, I think candidates matter less. Tell me if you disagree.
So I think I have to disagree a little bit. One metric I'll use is especially for Democrats, I think that the top of the ticket, well, if you look at Kamala Harris' performance compared to Joe Biden, she underperformed in nearly every single metric. I think there are maybe a few counties that she outperformed him by more than 2 points. And I think when you look at certain other down-the-ballot races where Democrats won and Kamala Harris lost, like, for instance, Ruben Gallego in Arizona, he was able to win and outperform Harris. Now, that could be, was it because of the unique qualities of Carrie Lake, or was it because of Ruben Gallego?
Sure.
But nonetheless, Gallego outperformed. There was other Democrats, too, who outperformed Kamala Harris in their respective House and Senate seats. But I think more importantly is the fact that, yes, while enthusiasm was really high at the very beginning when Joe Biden dropped out, from what I've seen, enthusiasm didn't stay. You know, a lot of Democrats, they're always talking about, did she peak too soon, right?
Yeah.
And I think that maybe, you know, the argument could be made that she did peak too soon, but ultimately voters, when people were asked their takeaways, from the exit polls, a lot of people said, I just didn't know enough about Kamala Harris, right? It's hard to mount a campaign in 109 days.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was what is still a marathon,
Yes.
but doing it in a sprint.
Yes.
So it wasn't
especially
that you
for
were,
American audiences, like other countries,
Yeah.
they have snap elections
Oh,
and stuff,
yeah,
but
sure.
America,
That's
we're
not
not
what we do. No, we're
exactly.
talking
We need
about
to really
2028
digest it. Yeah,
now.
exactly. Yes.
It takes a long period
Yes,
of time,
yeah.
and of course we have a lot of enthusiasm for
Yes,
this. But I'm just
yeah.
going to say the last takeaway
Yeah.
I had, and then we'll go into
Yeah.
what we're looking forward to 2025, was
Yes.
that Hoosier voters didn't care. We saw
Yes.
again
Yeah.
low voter turnout, overwhelmingly low in Marion County, 50%.
Yeah.
It was better in places like Hamilton County, but
Yeah.
nonetheless not super great.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and look in terms of
Yeah.
what we can look forward to
Yes.
in 2025, and looking in terms of the national landscape. One of the things that I'm curious about is we have a second Donald Trump administration, especially in terms of foreign affairs and our involvement in Ukraine,
Yes,
our
yeah.
involvement in Gaza. What changes? You know, and
Yeah.
we heard this. You saw some of that tension
Yeah.
between Harris and Biden. We saw it within the
Oh, yeah.
Democratic Party. I think the Republicans are more
In their own.
unified
Yeah.
generally,
Yeah.
but that also makes it divergent from what the Biden administration's policy is.
Yeah, yeah, big time. Yeah, I'm eager to see what Trump does with Ukraine. That's probably one of the big things I'm very eager to see what happens, and I'm both like biting my fingernails in a type of way, but also optimistic that I hope that we need to find an off-ramp in this war in Ukraine. There needs to be a way. We need to find avenues of peace. We can't just keep escalating this.
Do you think that's possible with Putin at the helm?
You know, yes, I have to believe it. I have to believe it because I don't think regime change I don't think, for one, an American president should never openly say it, but they also should not even privately be pushing for it because, I think that really Putin is in a position where it's hard to find an avenue to peace because there's been so much sunk cost into it, so many lives have been lost already,
Absolutely.
so much time.
Yeah, it's
and
an
if he pulls back now without anything to show for it, and same thing for Ukraine, they both sunk too much into it. But if you try to push for a regime change in Russia, it could lead to someone even more extreme taking power, right?
It certainly feels like there's no
There's
easy
no
way to
yeah,
end it.
exactly.
There's just absolutely
yeah,
no
but I'm
exit
hoping that Trump will be able to find a way. Even though I'm reluctant when Trump says, "Oh yeah, we'll just I'll say it and we'll have it and there'll be peace and stuff." I'm reluctant to just to take him for his word at it. But I hope that he's able to find Republicans are able to incentivize Russia or able to, in whatever means, or push Ukrainians to peace. But that's definitely another one. That's what I'm anticipating.
We'll
for
certainly
foreign
look
policy.
for that
Yeah.
in the next 4 years of the Trump administration. I think the other big question I have is looking in the changes of the federal government, because you have Democrats right now controlling the Senate. That will go back to the Republicans.
Yeah.
They'll enjoy unified government. So I'm fascinated. It's not just Donald Trump 2.0 that he's returning to the White House, but he's already selected some very controversial members of the cabinet. I know we talked about that in our last episode, but he'll have the House that's full of Republicans and the Senate that's dominating Republicans. Do they look at health care, repeal, replace, Affordable Care Act? We've heard about borders and like these mass deportations, what the process is for that. I think that's one of the things I'm looking in 2025, especially recognizing if we're talking about a president's legacy, you're really thinking about 4 years, but you only have 2 more years.
Exactly.
If I can go ahead and talk about 2026 elections, you only have 2 more years until the congressional midterms. So what is Congress going to be able to do under Donald Trump with unified government?
I think their top for domestic policy is probably going to be immigration. I think that was exit polls also indicate that economy and immigration were the 2 biggest things. I think that Donald Trump will. And I think there's a large appetite for that in both the House and the Senate. Now, depending on the minute details of it, some Republicans may be less eager to support some certain policies, but I fully expect something to come out of for immigration. And like you said, will they? I don't. I really, if I had to put money on it, I don't think Republicans will be able to reform Obamacare too much, or will be able to repeal the ACA. Maybe some reforms on the edges, but unless there's a comprehensive, not just a concept, but a comprehensive plan to replace it, I don't think that all the votes are there, especially for some, like Murkowski or some other maybe moderate Republicans would be eager to sign off on it. But yeah, definitely I expect an immigration bill to come rather quickly once Trump is
And that feels like a first
Yeah.
100 days
Yes,
kind
yes.
of mark that we would
Exactly,
expect
yeah.
in a presidential administration.
Yeah.
The last thing that I'm really curious to look
Yeah.
at is property taxes.
Yeah.
And as we said in the policy and history overview,
Yeah.
this is going to be at odds with the budget.
Yeah.
There's an increasing pressure in terms of healthcare costs,
Yeah.
but also people have been paying more in property taxes.
Yeah.
Now, Indiana generally has lower property
Yes.
taxes than nationwide,
Yeah.
but that's probably not a lot of comfort to folks
Yeah.
that look at their bills that have gone up twice,
Yeah.
even 3 times amount in the last several years.
Yes,
And I
yeah.
always think about people on fixed incomes.
Yeah.
I know Governor-elect Braun has said he wants to do something about property taxes, and
Yeah.
certainly taxpayers like to hear that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure at what cost that can be
Yes.
truly accomplished,
Yes,
or
exactly.
realistically, if this is maybe a phasing in, this will
Yeah.
be something in small incremental change,
Yeah.
so he can claim that he did it.
Yeah.
But also making sure we have a balanced budget and
Yes,
that we're
exactly.
paying for the needs and the
Yes,
services that we
especially
have.
something like education, which property taxes are one of the main drivers of.
Yes.
I worry because, like you said, I understand that I expect because that was a big topic. We were at the debate actually, and property taxes got brought up, and it needs to be somehow the state legislator and the governor needs to be able to help the people. I know this is it seemed like to help the people who are struggling with property taxes. At the same time, not to decrease the quality of things like healthcare or things like education, and not decreasing the requirements for people who benefit greatly from those services or roads, wherever the case might be. So yeah, it'll be a challenge nonetheless to see how Braun and his Republican supermajority in the state legislature will tackle the issue of property taxes. I'm eager to see what their solution is. Yeah.
As am I. I want to thank you so much for joining us. Levi, thank you so much for being here. It's sad to say, but this is actually the last show of the semester, but I truly enjoyed it. I'm so grateful. I loved getting to keep you informed on everything in politics, and what a privilege to get to do this here. Make sure you tune in next Wednesday to UND TV News. You can do this on YouTube at the UND TV channel and Xfinity channel 1096. And have a wonderful, fun, and safe Thanksgiving weekend. I'm Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson.
And I'm Levi All.